thank you for coming for this. I'm very excited to present this. So asteroid mining is going to be a very big industry in the future. It is, with the process of going up into space and retrieving material from asteroids for use on Earth. And you might think, why do we need these asteroids? We have plenty of metals and water on Earth that we can use. But there is a catch to that. And that is that our population is expanding exponentially while our resource yield expands linearly. So eventually we'll run out of resources or run out of the ability to harvest resources at a sustainable level. And this is called a Malthusian resource collapse or a Malthusian catastrophe. And that happens, when that happens, we'll basically hit carrying capacity, which is the amount of people we can fit onto the planet and still have a sustainable production of resources. And if we don't find a way to avoid this, we could end up with cities completely devoid of people that look exactly like this, where everyone has just not been able to survive because they didn't have what they needed. We're already seeing problems similar to this in some areas in Africa where they're having problems with water, some areas in the West Coast where they're having problems with water. And that's going to be a big resource that people are going to need a lot of that could end up in the Malthusian catastrophe. We're seeing problems with this with rare earth metal mining, where in China they've got mountains of radioactive waste from that. And they still are meeting the requirements we need, but they will run out eventually. And rare earth metals are needed for almost all our technology. So asteroid mining will probably be the gold rush of the next generation, and this is because asteroids contain an enormous amount of metal, from iron to nickel to platinum to gold to the rare earth metals. And that means that one asteroid that is around 1 kilometer in diameter would be able to provide us with enough resources for every human alive for a long period of time. And one asteroid would also be able to provide us with enough water for every human on Earth to have all they need to drink for an entire year. And this is clean water because it's never been exposed to the salts and stuff that we've got here. All you have to do is run it through a filter so that you can get the dust particles out. And then you have clean water. And that's not just for use on Earth, you can use it for use in space, because one of the costs of space travel is shipping materials to space station or into space on rockets. And if you're getting the material from space, that cuts down on costs dramatically. But the high concentration of metals means that they can provide the rare earth metals that we use in all our electronics, without which we wouldn't be able to have iPads, flat screen TVs, computers, pretty much everything that we have in modern society that we want to keep. So deep space also can be used for colonization, and asteroids can be used for this as well, because we aren't really that safe here. We like to think of Earth as being a fairly safe place, but in reality, we have had hundreds of near extinction events. We've had asteroids hit the Earth, like the one that wiped out the dinosaurs at the end of the Cretaceous. We've had volcanic eruptions that have wiped out nearly the entirety of mankind. We've had threats that we've made ourselves, like nuclear warfare and things that we can't even detect that easily, like solar flares that might hit us and knock out our power grid and send us into anarchy. So having everyone on Earth is basically, if we put all our eggs in one basket, it's a really bad idea. And if we send people into space to colonize deep space or colonize other planets, then we can preserve humanity. Even if Earth was destroyed, humanity would still live on. And a really good thing about asteroids is we can hollow them out for use with building colonies in space. There's a bunch of them that are over 1 kilometer in length or diameter, and then you hollow them out and then give it a little spin using some thrusters, and then you can actually potentially provide simulated gravity, but you can also use the inside for farming or human population. And this would also help mitigate overpopulation on Earth, because we could then start putting people on asteroid colonies or on colonies like Mars or the Moon that we could build with materials from asteroids. And that would also provide a lot of scientific advantages for us. We got a bunch of scientific information from like the moon landings, from our rovers to Mars, the probes we've sent out of the solar system. And imagine what we could do if we actually had people up there researching these things and not just machines that are just sending us back data packets. Now, deep space we don't really know a lot of the effects of deep space on humanity. We've never sent anyone out of our solar system or out of our Earth-Moon system, so both of those are an unknown. We don't know how exactly it will affect someone psychologically, because this is the most desolate, most isolated place that we can think of. And we don't know how it'll affect people being that far from their home. When fighter pilots near the upper atmosphere, some experience a psychological phenomenon known as the break-off effect. And that can result in antisocial behavior, violence, outbursts, and emotional instability. This has led to some people actually having psychological trauma from going to the edge of space or near the edge of space where they won't go in an airplane again because they don't want to be in that position again. And we don't know what causes this. We don't know if it happens why it happens to the specific people. We do know it does not happen to everyone, and that with proper training for going into space, it's less likely to happen. But in the long run, it could be that when we send people out of our Earth-Moon system, that anyone we send up there might have this happen, and that's a risk that, in order to colonize other planets, it's a risk we have to be willing to take. But philosophically, it might not be a risk that's worth it, because if we cause harm to the first crews we send up there by doing this, then in effect we've harmed our entire species by having us all agree to send them up and have this happen to them. Though if we don't do this and send people into space to explore or mine asteroids, we are also kind of slacking on our duty to preserve humanity and to make it so that we have the best possible living environment on Earth. Which is why the first missions will probably have to be done with unmanned probes. And that way we can set up infrastructure for communication with Earth. We don't also know the effects of prolonged exposure to microgravity on the human nervous system. We do know that it can cause osteoporosis and muscle loss, but we don't really know if it will affect people psychologically. Asteroids can also potentially be used for farming in space, as I mentioned earlier. The space inside of it is shielded from radiation by multiple feet of metal. So if you were to hollow one out, that would be multiple feet of nickel iron that could shield from cosmic radiation, but also could shield from micrometeoroid impacts that would damage most ordinary spacecraft. We could also use material from them, such as silicon, iron, and rare earth metals, to build a hypothetical structure called a Dyson swarm, which is a swarm of satellites orbiting a star, in this case our sun. And these would collect solar energy from the star and then transmit it via microwave radiation back to Earth, where we could use it for electricity and heating and energy. And this could provide a near infinite source of energy that would provide us with enough power for everyone on the entire planet to have virtually free electricity. It would also make it so that we are able to harness the power of a star, which means that we can then use that power to propel spacecraft using very powerful lasers, which we could use to send the next generation of probes out of the solar system. Asteroid stations could also be used to safeguard our species in case of an asteroid impact or mass extinction, because we can then send these stations out of the solar system as generation ships, where we have a large crew on board, and then that crew and their children and their children's children would drift through space until they encounter a planet, and then would in that way preserve human culture and human society for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. In the far future, with the abundance of resources we gather from asteroids, the sky is no longer the limit. Once we use the asteroids for resources and eliminate all scarcity on Earth, we can then take the next step in our evolution and become something larger than we are now. We can become a unified species that is capable of doing pretty much anything. And then we can take to the stars and embark on the greatest adventure that has ever been thought of. So that's it.
Can I have the time?
10:47.
Bennett, your last slide is a wonderful segue to the question that I have for you, and that is, so you brought up the quote-unquote next step in evolution, and so what is going to be, we know that variety is what makes humans so adaptable, correct?
Right.
So if you're sending a limited number of humans to colonize space, how would those individuals be selected so that you don't get a very narrow range of genetic diversity?
Well, one of the things, they found that the minimum viable human population is around 20,000. So any colony that's designed to be self-sustaining would have to have around 20,000 people, and that would provide enough genetic diversity for them to continue with no defects or anything. But you'd also probably have to have a testing thing for colonies on planets. That wouldn't be so much necessary because you'd be able to get to them fairly easily. For colonies or ships that would be sent out of the solar system, you'd have to have rigorous testing to make sure that only people who are actually capable of withstanding the pressure of being in a deep space environment for the rest of their life can go. Because we wouldn't necessarily want to have someone on a ship who would be prone to violence. So that would be a thing. You'd also probably want to have the most amount of people on a ship you'd probably want to have with a very high intelligence or a very high education level so that they know how to operate the stuff.
Well, that sounds very much like
besides that,
a very dangerous topic. Right?
But besides that, you could also do tests for different groups that aren't just that. So while you might have people on command level being the ones who are very, very educated because they know how to run the ships.
Yes.
And that's not necessarily for anything but running the ships, because these are very complicated pieces of machinery they'd be running. They would have to know how to do that and have to be capable of doing that, otherwise they would put themselves and everyone else at risk. Sure. Other than that, you'd probably end up having lists with quotas to meet, so that you can make sure that everyone who's not applying to engineering or command level has a chance at getting onto the ship, regardless of their station in life, regardless of their intelligence or their education. Everyone should have a chance at going into space and doing this, just maybe not in a position where they could blow up the ship if they did something wrong.
Good.
Part of what I was interested in a little bit of that was the psychology side of things and just how much that can affect someone's their personality, just how they affect just everything. So is there specialists in place for that? Because besides someone who regularly specializes in a certain area, they need to know more about how it's going to affect it. Is there people who are going to be specialists for that? Is there a solution if so many people, if it just doesn't work out? What do you do from there?
Currently most people are therapists, either military or civilian. We don't really know very much about why the psychological effects happen, and what would happen otherwise. So it's very likely a whole new field of psychology would open up. And that would definitely require people to take a closer look into it. Other than that, there's not much we will know about it until we do it.
First and foremost, I want to affirm the fact that you brought in a fascinating human aspect into that whole part about psychology is brilliant and super engaging. But secondarily, how actually actually, like, this is a crazy topic, I've never even heard of this in my entire life, so how actually viable is this?
It's pretty viable. Yeah, right now Luxembourg is working on becoming the asteroid mining capital. Private companies still have to be the ones who are doing this. Nations can't because of the Outer Space Treaty.
Yeah.
Okay. But a lot of asteroids are easier to get to than the moon because they require less delta V, and then we can get to them, use a robotic probe to pick a boulder off the surface and bring it back, and then we can process it.
So is there a need for humans to actually go there, or could we, like, just theoretically, could we build, robots that could do a good enough job that we wouldn't even need to worry about the psychological problem?
It could be all automated. The reason that I assume humans would go up there is just we have, as a species, a drive to explore and a drive to test our limits. So probably the first people to go up there would be daredevils, people seeking thrill, and then shortly after that you have the pioneers and prospectors who would be trying to do mining on their own and colonizing on their own without the support of major corporations.
And then one last question, sorry. So if major corporations would be the main ones mining, would there be, it sounds like there's an abundance of what are rare materials here on Earth right now. So if major corporations and many of them got their hands on this, how would that, do you think, affect like the economic status of a lot of these precious metals?
Well, asteroid mining, one of the side effects of it is that pretty much any resource we have here would become worthless,
right,
because there would be so much that you wouldn't be able to ascribe monetary value, and it would put us into a post-scarcity society that could end up in a really good way. It could end up like what the Federation looks like in Star Trek, where it's virtually utopian and everyone's working more on bettering themselves than on like making money and stuff, because you wouldn't need it because there would be nothing to spend it on. But it also could end up horribly wrong. So you'd probably have to have serious oversight from an international governing body like the UN, and there would probably have to be very strict laws. Most likely the corporations that do asteroid mining would be forbidden from like having any kind of military presence or anything on Earth, so that they don't try to use their abundance of resources to take over Earth or something.
Oh, wow. Thank you very much.
No problem.